Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm very pleased to have Saifedean Ammous from Jordan. Saifedean, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me, Ludovic.
Saifedean, you're based in Jordan at the moment. Can you tell us a bit more about your activity and present yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Saifedean Ammous. I'm the author of three books. The Bitcoin Standard was my first book, published in 2018, and it's been translated to about 37 languages at this point. And my second book is The Fiat Standard, published in 2021. And my third book was published last year, Principles of Economics. It's a textbook in economics, university level book to introduce the ideas of economics. I used to be a university professor in economics at the Lebanese American University, but now I am an independent scholar. I write books and I teach online. I teach my courses online to students from all over the world. And I also have a podcast, the Bitcoin Standard podcast as well.
Okay, so you mentioned in your book that I have here in French, Les Talons Bitcoin, that you're an independent researcher. Can you tell us a bit more what's going on with economists right now? And there's quite a lot of things happening the last I would say 40 years. And in mainstream academic programs, it's always the same rhetoric and propaganda that is disseminated about economic principles.
Yeah, I have very strong opinions on these issues. If you've read my book, I think modern academic economics is primarily a method for justifying central banking control over money. Central banks want to control people's ability to use money. They want to control the supply of money, and they want to be able to finance government spending and finance government cronies with their inflation. And the majority of academic economics is focused on justifying this and providing rationales and reasons for it. And this, I believe, goes back all the way up to the early progressive era in the early 20th century in the US and in the UK. And we see that modern academic economics has become completely divorced, essentially, from reality, from economic reality. And I believe this became abundantly clear. The bankruptcy of modern economics came abundantly clear for me in the 1970s, because in the 1970s, we completely falsified the basis on which academic Keynesian economics is built. So all of the economics that you learn into university, if you go and you study macroeconomics at a university, pretty much anywhere in the world, with a very small number of exceptions, you will be taught the Keynesian idea, which is that the state of the economy is primarily determined by the level of spending. And if we have high spending, if the level of spending is larger than the level of output, then we are going to have inflation. Whereas if the level of spending is lower than the level of output, then we are going to have unemployment. So according to the Keynesian model, we can either have inflation or unemployment. We cannot have both. And yet, in the 1970s, the vast majority of the world experienced inflation and unemployment at the same time, which, whatever you think about the reasons or the causes for it, is sufficient to completely destroy Keynesian economics as an academic theory. There is no recovering from this, because the entire theory rests on the idea that either spending is too high, in which case you have inflation, or spending is too low, in which case you have unemployment. But if spending is at a level that you have inflation and unemployment together, then your model is broken. Your idea of understanding how the world works is broken. And the Keynesian model postulates that essentially those two are like a seesaw. If one goes up, the other one has to go down. And yet we find many examples where both are high and many examples where both are low. So therefore, we cannot say that this model is accurate. And this should have been the nail in the coffin of Keynesian economics. If economics was truly scientific in its approach, it would only take one instance of this being the case in order for people who believe in this theory to say, no, this is inaccurate and we don't think it's right. But of course, this isn't scientific. This is propaganda, and it's out there to justify government control of money. And so they continue to come up with new rationalizations and new excuses. And here we are, 50 years later, people still learn the same ideas in macroeconomics. When I was a university professor, we taught textbooks that taught this idea. We need to control for the level of spending in order to control for inflation and unemployment. So this is why I prefer to be an independent scholar. I mean, I worked at a university for 10 years. I thought it was good because I enjoy dealing with students, but I think it's much better to be independent. I think the internet allows people to communicate with one another freely without having to go through these centralized institutions that, in my opinion, are corrupt. And so therefore I can reach many more readers and many more writers and many more students by teaching on my website and by writing my books independently.
Okay, I been researching the money issues for many years because I started working on that in the United States in 2000 and between 2000 and 2004, especially following the 2001 11 attacks at the heart of finance in New York. And then I just wrote a book on sound money that's been published in August at Maya Publisher. So the money issue is something I've been very interested in researching for a very long time. And I think you are one of the rare economists who has a very good understanding of what money is and what it should be. In your book, Saifedean, you're saying the main deception of modernity lies in the idea that the state needs to manage the money supply. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think this is a very pivotal point, that all modern economics is built on the idea that government has to manage the money supply. And once you accept that, you accept the framing and the premise of all modern economic thought, which is the government is there trying to make things better and trying to fix the world. And the only question is, how should they fix it? What kind of monetary policy should they follow? What kind of fiscal policy they should follow? But it's not questioned whether they should follow any policy whatsoever, whether they should have a monetary policy, whether the government even should control the money supply. And it's not questioned in economics, but it also seeps into all aspects of life, in my opinion. It affects everything because it doesn't just allow governments to control economies and control money. It allows them to control all aspects of our life because all aspects of our life are intertwined with money. Food, industry, education, everything that is part of the human experience is influenced by money. And when you are able to control money, you are able to control all of those things. And so everything that we think of as being modern, as being part of the modern world, is very heavily influenced by the fact that it's distorted by government money. And this is the focus of my second book, The Fiat Standard, which looks at the fiat monetary system and its long-term implications on humanity, because we've had this kind of monetary system for about a century. So it allows governments to finance war. It allows governments to spend endless amounts of money on war because they don't have a hard budget, which is what they had under the gold standard. Under the gold standard, the government had a set amount of money, and taking taxes from people was expensive and complicated. But when you move to fiat money, credit money, the government doesn't limit its war effort to the size of its budget, the size of its own stash of money. The government can continue to print more money, effectively devaluing its citizens' money without having to go and take the money from them. So you don't need to send soldiers to your citizens and put a gun to their head and tell them, give me all the gold that you have because we need to fight a war, because that's extremely complicated, unpopular, and expensive. And it can start a second war at home when you're fighting another war abroad. So instead, you just increase the supply of money, and then You steal the value that people have in their money at home, and that allows you to keep financing your war. And this is what started with World War One, and in my opinion, has been the main and most important reason for the continuous growth in the amount of war spending throughout the 20th century and in the increased amount of conflict that takes place because of this, because any problem in politics is likely to become a war when governments have infinite money to fall back on. And that's, I think, the best way of understanding why we had so many wars in the 20th century and so many people died in the 20th century. And you see this all over. And you see this in every aspect of modern life. And in the fiat standard, I discuss in detail how it affects food. Governments being able to finance themselves from printing money leads to inflation in the sense of rising prices. So people aren't happy about prices rising, and people aren't happy about their food becoming more and more expensive. So governments are trying and make it so that people don't notice that their food is becoming more expensive. So what do? They try and subsidize cheap food to make cheap food cheaper. They try to tell people with their dietary guidelines to stay away from the expensive foods and to eat the cheap stuff. And if you look at the roots of that, and I've helped write another book called Fiat Food, which I've published with my publishing house, with an investigative journalist called Matthew Lysiak. He went through this and through documentary history and found all kinds of information about just how much our modern idea of nutrition, the things that the government tells you you should eat and the things that tell you you shouldn't eat. They tell you that meat is bad because it raises cholesterol. They tell you that you should eat 6 to 10 rations of grain every day because that's good for you. It's not a coincidence that their science concludes that all the things that are expensive are bad for you and all the things that are cheap are good for you. They wanted to cover up inflation. And so modern nutrition science is a big, giant scam. And at the heart of it is the fact that it is an excuse for governments to try and hide the inflation by feeding people garbage. And the result is people are getting sicker and sicker all of the time because of the food that they eat.
Okay, can you just be more specific about fiat currency, the fiat currency system? So the fiat money is basically money created out of thin air. There's no real asset to back it, and it's developed through debt. It's made in two ways, through central banking and fractional reserve. I was just a bit surprised that in your book you did not mention central fractional reserve. Any reason for this?
In the Bitcoin standard, I did not get in depth into the problems of the fiat system. That's why I wrote the second book, the fiat standard. So that's where I get into it in more detail. And I discuss how it works in more detail. So I didn't have enough time to discuss the plumbing of how the fiat system works in the Bitcoin standard. I focus on the fact that in the fiat monetary system, the money supply continues to grow. And so in the Bitcoin standard, I just put aside all of the mechanics of how fiat works, and I look at the supply percentage growth rate per year. And so we see that the US dollar and the Swiss franc and the Danish and Swedish currencies, they are the best national currencies over the last 60 years because their percentage growth rate per year is around 6-7% only, 7 to 8% only per year. So the supply grows only 7 to 8%. But of course, you compare that to gold. Gold is at around 2% per year, 1.5 to 2%. And Bitcoin currently is around 1.5 to 2%, but starting in a couple of months, it's going to drop to 1%. And then every 4 years, it drops by half. And that's a central idea in the book, that the most important determinant of what becomes money is how easy it is to make this thing and how much the supply increases. Things whose supply increases very quickly witness the value get destroyed. So within national currencies, you see that the euro, the dollar, the Swiss franc, the yen, and the British pound, they do a lot better than the most other currencies because they are the ones whose supply grows the least. Only 7, 8, 9% per year supply growth in these currencies. Whereas if you look at, say, the currencies of Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Lebanon, when they have hyperinflation, the supply will grow at 100% per year, 50%, 200% sometimes. And so what happens? Everybody who has money in the easy money, everybody who's got wealth stored in the Zimbabwe dollar or in the Lebanese lira, they witness their wealth dissipate and get destroyed. Whereas people who store their wealth in the relatively harder money, like the dollar or the euro, they witness their wealth get preserved over time, relatively speaking. And you see the same dynamic between national currencies and Bitcoin right now, because Bitcoin is harder than all of these currencies. Now, in the fiat standard, I discuss how fiat is created. And essentially, the key thing to understand, most people think of it, fiat money, as being paper money. But that's not really accurate. Only 5, maybe 10% of fiat money is actual physical paper money. The vast majority is digital. It's a digital currency. The dollar is a digital currency, and the euro is already a digital currency. Only a small percentage of the euros and the dollars are printed. So how do we make new euros? Who decides how new euros get made or how dollars get made? And the answer is that any financial institution that is connected to the central bank makes new dollars or new euros every time it creates a new loan. And so when you go to get a mortgage from your bank, you go to your bank in France and you borrow €1,000,000, let's say, in order to buy a house. That €1,000,000 is not coming from the bank's own money, and it's not coming from the bank's clients. They are making most of it out of thin air. They're making new €1,000,000. They just make them because the central bank allows them to make them. Because if they do make too much, the central bank will bail them out. So the central bank guarantees their money creation process because the central bank is able to step in and enforce it. And so, as a result, they are constantly making more money and constantly increasing the supply. But there are limits. Your bank isn't just out there giving money to everybody. There are limits. The central bank controls how much lending takes place. And every time new loans come into existence, new money comes into existence. But every time new loans are paid off, old money dies. And so the money supply contracts. And so the creation of fiat money is irregular. You get many years in which it's growing. But then when you have a recession or you have a financial crisis, the money supply contracts and it declines.
Okay, let's clarify. Most of the time in your book, you're talking about hard money. I'm more familiar with sound money. Sound money is the terminology which is used by Ron Paul, the strongly advocate of sound money. He was congressman. He fought almost all his life to have an audit of the Federal Reserve System, and he actually said that once the Fed would be audited, it would be the end of it. What do you think?
I think so. I think it's very telling that they don't do an audit, and it's absolutely amazing that the U.S. government in particular wants you to report every single payment that's over $600 that anybody makes. And $600 is really not a lot of money today, because with inflation, $600 is the price of a dinner in a nice restaurant in New York these days, probably. And so you have to be reporting all of these payments that are over $600. And yet you have a central bank that has thousands of tons of gold and billions and trillions of dollars of securities and financial instruments, and it does not get audited. And I think it's extremely telling that that is the case, because I think the entire thing is not something that would survive on the market. And it survives because the government is able to protect itself from competition. It survives because there is a centralized monopoly wherein we need to move money through centralized financial institutions, because physical fiat money or physical gold are difficult and expensive to move around. And so if people in the US want to trade with people in France, it's difficult for you individually to take a bar of gold and send it to Germany or to France or to the US or to China every time you want to trade with another country. And so what ends up happening is that you have your account at a bank, and the bank has an account at the central bank, and then your American trade partner has an account at a bank, and his bank has an account at the central bank. And at the end of the day or week or month or year, the French and the US central bank settle with one another. So by making central banking a monopoly and preventing free market competition, we all have no choice but to use the central banking system. And that's what allows them to abuse the system, because they can make more money, they can devalue our money, but what are you going to do about it? You can't just go and find another central bank to use. There's a monopoly on central banks until, of course, Bitcoin comes along and breaks that monopoly, because now you can send money from France to the US without having to go through your central bank.
Okay, 65%, I would say, of your book is about reestablishing the truth about economic principles. As I said, you are one of the rare economists nowadays, just telling the truth, basically. I'd just like so that people don't understand very well that there's a strong connection between fake money, so fiat currency, and perpetual wars. You mentioned that just before, that actually having a fake money system encourage perpetual wars and conflicts. Can you confirm that, especially with the United States creating conflicts all over the place, destroying countries, Ukraine, Iraq, Libya, and then once everything is destroyed, they come up with BlackRock, Vanguard to reconstruct, rebuild the country?
Yeah, I think this is something that is, as I was mentioning earlier, it's baked into the way that fiat money works, in that it allows governments to increase the money supply, and therefore they don't have to present their citizens with the bill for the war that they launch. So Americans, for instance, and not just Americans, but Europeans, I think, in most rich countries, most people are so ridiculously propagandized and brainwashed. They think they are making money out of these wars. So Americans think that we fought Iraq because we are the rulers of the world and we made money because we got their oil. And these people are idiots because you don't get free oil because you are an American. Switzerland did not fight against Iraq. And if you're a Swiss citizen, you have to go to the gas station and you have to pay for the gasoline that you put into your car. And America fought a war against Iraq, but if you're an American citizen, you also have to go to the gas station and you have to pay for the gasoline. You don't get free gasoline because America fought a war. And if you think you're benefiting from the war, the kindest thing that I can say about you is that you're a complete moron. But more realistically, you're not just a moron, you're a criminal, because your stupidity is not just hurting you into getting robbed, it's actually getting real people killed. And that's why anybody who believes these ideas, anybody who promotes the idea that the US is fighting a foreign policy that is in the benefits of the US, is a complete moron and a criminal. In reality, the US spent something like $8 trillion on the Iraq war, and they're still spending money because they still have troops in Iraq, and there's absolutely no good reason for them to be in Iraq. But they spent $8 trillion on fighting the war in Iraq in the last 20 years now. It's been almost 21 years now. It's 21 years, $8 trillion. Where did those $8 trillion come from? If you went to the American people in 2002 and you told them, we have a great plan, we are going to bring democracy to Iraq, and we are going to spend $8 trillion on doing it, and that's going to mean that we are going to get rid of Saddam. How many Americans would have voted for this? I would imagine if they understood that there's $8 trillion bill, I think you would struggle to get 1% of the US population to support this. Everybody would think of millions of things that you could spend $8 trillion on. That's an enormous amount of money. And yet they managed to do it, even though the US is supposedly a democracy. And it is a democracy. People do get to vote. You know, they voted for Bush. He was a democratically elected president. And then they voted for him again 2 years later after the war. And they voted for Obama, who continued the war. And then they voted for Trump, who also continued the war. And they voted for Biden, who still keeps US troops in Iraq and is still spending money on Iraq. So how is it that the people who wouldn't want to spend $8 trillion on bringing democracy to Iraq have spent $8 trillion, even though they get to vote for the presidents? The answer is that fiat money makes them brainwashed idiots. And the reason for that is that the government goes and finances the war from its inflation, effectively, and from its money printing, by borrowing printed money. And people think there is no cost to the war. Look, we're not spending anything. Remember, Paul Wolfowitz went in front of Congress and said the war is going to cost maybe $1 billion maximum. He was off by 8,000-fold. The war cost 8,000 times as much. Imagine you want to go build a house, and the contractor tells you the house is going to cost $1 million to build, and then it ends up costing $8 billion. That's what happened. Now, is anybody holding him accountable? Is anybody asking him, where are the $8 trillion that you're going to pay us back because you made us pay $8 trillion extra? No. The war was financed by government spending, and it helped create the inflation of the last 20 years. It helped create the financial crises of the last 20 years. All of that inflation is not free. And it made the living standards of Americans worse off. If that money was kept in the pockets of Americans, they would be a lot better off. Even if that money was spent by the government on things that are less destructive than killing Iraqis, it would have made Americans a lot better off. But yet it continues. And they continue to be manipulated into this stupidity all the time. We saw just a couple of months ago, the prostitutes that make up the US Congress decided to give $14 billion to the Israeli government to continue with its genocide in Gaza, where it's pummeling and killing civilians, obviously targeting civilians, obviously destroying civilian infrastructure, with its own leaders going on TV and saying, we want to make Gaza uninhabitable. We want to make Gaza unlivable. We want to get the people of Gaza to leave. We want to reduce the population of Gaza from 2.3 million people to 100,000 people, 200,000 people. If we do that, then we are going to succeed. And they're out there saying this publicly, and the American government is out there giving them money. And American people think that this is something for their own good, but they're not being asked to pay the money up front. And that's what fiat allows. Fiat allows the government to spend first and then bring you the bill later through the increase in the prices of the things that you consume. And because most people are morons who studied only Keynesian economics, they don't see the connection. They think prices are going up because greedy corporations are doing greedy things. They don't realize your prices are going up because you're out there murdering people. You're spending your money on murder because you're a moron and a murderer. And that's why your prices are going up. It's not because evil corporations are out there conspiring against you. It's because you're a murderer. That's the bill coming in for your murder.
We've been talking for almost half an hour of different economics points, but I'd just like to clarify the backbone of these economic principles. It's the Austrian School of Economics. All your writings are based on this. I've got the Bitcoin standard here in French, the French version. I've got also my book that I printed, I got published in August, also based on the Austrian School of Economics principles. We know that the initiators are Karl Menger, Ludwig van Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Jesus Huerta de Soto, Murray Rothbard, again Van Boom Beverk. Can you just briefly, Saifedean, explain to the audience what are those principles and why they are not taught in schools and universities?
So from my perspective, Austrian economics is just economics. It's the continuation of the centuries old or millennia old tradition of economics. You can trace it back to Aristotle. You can trace it back to Islamic economists. You can trace it back to the scholastic economists in Spain. And you can trace it back to David Ricardo, Adam Smith. It's a long tradition that has traveled all over the world. These ideas built on each other. And in my opinion, in the early 20th century, or late 19th century, these ideas culminated in the Austrian school, as well as other places, but the Austrian school was really one of the leading places for understanding economics. In a sane world, if we hadn't gone to fiat money, we would have had, I believe, Austrian economics would just be called economics today. We wouldn't be calling it Austrian. However, we went into the world of fiat money, wherein government control of money is the most important thing. And so it became necessary for economics to be the science of government control of money. The starting assumption and the starting foundational point for all economics in the 20th century has been government control of money. And this starts in the early 20th century with people like Irving Fisher, but then it really takes off with John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s, who people think of him as an economist, but really he was a propagandist. He was not an economist.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned in your book that he was not, he didn't have really economic training, and he was, how do you say, um, how would I say that? A statistician, a bad statistician.
Yeah, he studied
That's what he
statistics
said.
and he studied statistics at university. He took one course in economics and he didn't do well in it and he didn't learn it. And he sort of took pride in the fact that he wasn't really learned in economics. He didn't understand or read a lot of the classical economists. And he presents this as if, I'm such a genius that I don't need to read all of those people. But really, he's just an idiot who couldn't understand those people. And his economic ideas are in no way original and they are in no way valid. They are just what governments wanted to hear. He gave governments the rationale for what they wanted to do anyway, which is control money supply, go off the gold standard, and print money. And so his ideas were treated as if they were some incredible scientific discovery that is going to revolutionize the world. But all he's done is just reinvent inflation. He's just find new rationale for inflation. He's no different from the Roman emperors who used to destroy their currency by putting more metal into the coins rather than and taking out the gold, reducing the gold content of their coins. He's no different from the Chinese who had first introduced paper money as a way to make their society richer. And he's no different from John Law. You're familiar from him about him. You're familiar with him from France, the Scottish con artist who thought that we could make everybody rich if we just make a new money that is backed by land in Louisiana. And that ended in disaster. And it's the same idea, the same scam. The basic idea is if we make more money, if we have more pieces of paper, if we have more credit floating around, then we are able to create more prosperity. We'll have more economic goods, we'll have more capital goods. That's essentially the main idea of Keynesian economics. It's precisely that stupid and it's that transparent. And it's been dominant not because it won any intellectual debate, not because it produces superior results, but it gives central banks what they want. And central banks are the ones who finance economic education all around the world. And central banks are the ones who determine what goes on at universities. So if you look at the research at universities, if you see that the vast majority of monetary research, say in the US, more than 80 or maybe even 90% of papers are financed by the Federal Reserve, either directly or indirectly. And that is what determines it. And so that's why real economics now is associated with this old school that is almost dead as an intellectual tradition, or at least almost died as an intellectual tradition by the middle of the 20th century. And it's been revived over the last 30, 40 years, thanks to the efforts of some American economists, Murray Rothbard in particular, and libertarians in America in general, people like Ron Paul and the Mises Institute. And really, it got its real revival thanks to the internet, because they put all of these people's books online for free. And people from all over the world are able to access those books and read them and learn so much from them. And that's what's driving this incredible renaissance in Austrian economics. So people keep hearing more and more about Austrian economics. But from where I stand, Austrian economics is just economics.
Can you just confirm that basically John Maynard Keynes, the fake economist, was actually used by the central banking and the central governance advocates to use this guy as a way to manipulate the concepts of economics and reach their goals for and their agenda? Do you believe in this agenda that is getting much more visible now? A central agenda of New World Order, central banking. We'll talk about central bank digital currencies also in a few minutes. What do you think about this global agenda of there was also transhumanism related to their plan. Klaus Schwab saying that in 2030 you won't have anything, but you're gonna be happy. What do you think of those crazy guys?
So I'm not so sure about it being this one unified global agenda. I think it's just politically extremely convenient to use these ideas, that governments from all over the world use it because it finances them very brilliantly. So you find enemy governments from all over the world that fought each other, who disagree on all kinds of things, but they all agree that they need to control the money supply. So this is the one thing that unites all of the world's governments, essentially. They all want to, well, not all of them, to be fair. El Salvador has gone on a Bitcoin standard, and some governments don't use their own money. They use the dollar or the euro, some other country, money from another country. So they don't all want to control their own money. Well, I mean, they don't all get to, but I think they all would want to, except maybe El Salvador. But in any case, the incentive is there, and it's very strong, to go along with the Keynesian ideas, because then you can print your own money and you can finance yourself with your own money, and you can finance your spending with it. And most importantly, to close the circle, you finance economic education so that everybody believes this idea. So I don't necessarily think there has to be a united global agenda to push this stuff. I think everywhere in the world, these ideas will be popular because that's what governments want to hear, because it's much more conducive to them than telling them economic truth, which is you cannot fix your economy because your economy is not something that you are able to control and manipulate and fix yourself. And the best thing that you can do for your economy is to reduce the amount of government spending and to let people keep their own money so that they can spend it as they want, and to give people the freedom to invest and do whatever it is that they want to do with their businesses. That's the reality, in my opinion, of what would be the ideal thing for a government to do. But of course, governments don't want to hear that. And so they want to come up with excuses for why they print money. And in my mind, I think where we get into this kind of idea of you will own nothing and you will be happy. And the reason they want you to eat bugs and they want you to eat soya and they want you to not eat meat. And the reason they tell you that if you drive your car, it's going to ruin the weather and it's going to create a catastrophe and it's going to boil the oceans and it's going to make the earth uninhabitable. I don't think this is just silly science. It is obviously silly science, but it's not innocent silly science. I think there's an underlying point that drives all of these conclusions toward the direction of you being poor. It's not a coincidence that everything that you want to do that improves your quality of life is somehow bad because science says it's bad. So meat gives you cancer, Meat gives you cholesterol, high cholesterol, and that's bad for you. Eggs are bad for you. Animal food is bad for you. Meat and eating cows is bad for the planet. Cow farts is going to destroy the oceans. Didn't you hear? Well, if you eat meat, then the cows are going to fart, and then the cows will destroy the planet. And if you drive your car, you will also destroy the planet. If you keep your house warm in the winter, you will also destroy your planet. If you have a big house, you will destroy the planet. And all manners of things that you like to consume that make your life better and important are bad for the planet. So, therefore, what is good for the planet is for you to live a life where you own very few things. Move into a tiny, tiny little pod in a giant building because that creates economies of scale for heating. So you don't need a lot of energy to be heated. Stay home because there are diseases and bad things outside that can kill you. And if you want to move around, you don't drive a car. Or if you have to drive a car, drive a small little electric car that has a limited range and that is easy to control centrally so that they can switch it off whenever they decide, oh no, there's a climate emergency. The weather is getting really bad. We have to stop you from driving so that that makes the better weather better. And then also eat highly processed cheap garbage because that is cheaper and better for you. So effectively, you get people to live as slaves, then you fix the weather. That's the kind of science that we believe in, and it's ridiculous. We laugh at ancient cultures like the Mayans, and we say, "Oh, they used to murder children in order to fix the weather, in order for the crops to get better." But this is exactly what we're doing. We are captured by an insane cult of people who think we control the weather of the earth. The earth is an enormous, enormous, enormous body of water and rocks that's twirling in space around a much more enormous thing called the sun. The sun is about 1 million times, I think, as big as the earth. And the earth is enormous, and we're a tiny, 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 tiny little speck on the face of the earth. And yet we believe that our actions control the weather of this giant rock hurtling in space around the sun. And coincidentally enough, the only way that we can have the right, best, good weather is for you to be poor and for governments to continue to print money. Isn't that an interesting coincidence?
Well, we can see that they use fear and make people guilty about anything basically. Through they use the mainstream media. It's so blatant. But let's go a bit closer from what they want to put in place. The famous Great Reset. When doing this interview, I'm based in Geneva here in Switzerland. The World Economic Forum is just down the road. What do you think about this Great Reset? It seems like they want to manage to destroy the monetary system they put in place 1 century ago and to put a new system in place with no cash, central bank digital currencies. By the way, Trump said recently that he would never allow central bank digital currency if he's elected. What do you think?
I mean, well, we'll see if he's going to get elected. But I mean, central bank digital currencies, I think, are becoming more and more a reality anyway, because it's not that radically different from what we have. In other words, you look at Canada, for instance, governments could shut down the Canadian truckers when they protested against the government. They shut down their bank accounts and they confiscated their money. And this is, I think, possible in today's technology. What central bank digital currencies will do is that it'll allow this to be much more efficient. It'll be easier for government to do it. They won't need the cooperation of the banks. They can just click a button. And I think it's going to allow a level of control that is much more elaborate, which you can't really do as easily with banks, wherein governments will start centrally planning who gets to spend how much on what. And so you have an allowance where you can only spend you can only buy, say, 1 kilogram of beef every month, and you can only buy 1 gasoline tank per month. And then if they have a central bank digital currency, that makes that kind of thing much easier to maintain and run, because they'll be able to control how much every single person spends. They'll be able to control inflation by stopping you from spending. So I think it makes fiat money worse, and it gives central banks more control and allows them to finance themselves with more inflation. But it's not very different from what central banks are morphing into anyway. And so if Trump is elected, I mean, look, at the end of the day, Trump is a politician, and it's not just a politician. He's a TV person. He is an actor who goes on TV, and he knows how to play on TV to get people to like him. And he made a lot of noises before he got elected about he's going to change things. He's going to drain the swamp and do this and do that. He didn't really do much. He was not very different from any of the previous presidents. And
Do you
we
think
saw.
it's because the deep state, which is very strong, and he was not able to do whatever he wanted in some ways?
No, I think he's just. I mean, I think he is a TV person. I mean, I don't know. I don't really follow politics, and I don't really pay much attention. So this is just me speculating, and I could be wrong, and I don't even care if I'm right or wrong. But you asked, so in my opinion, he seems to me like just a TV person. He knows how to get people to pay attention to him, and he figured out that he could get elected by tapping into people's um, deep-seated rejection and anger toward issues like the deep state, like Hillary Clinton's corruption, like immigration, like all of these things. So when he was running on election, he was talking a lot about all of these things, but he is in it for himself. He's a narcissist. He wants to be president. And when you're president, I mean, it's a lot easier to go and take photo shots for photo shoots with people and travel around and get to look like a president. That's a lot easier than taking on real power interests. And so you should remember when COVID came about. I mean, he presents himself as this kind of hero of the people, and yet when COVID came about, he was marching right behind Fauci. He gave Fauci all the power in the world. He still takes pride in being the one who introduced the Pfizer, the vaccine that was given. So I think when push comes to shove, he doesn't have it in him. I don't think he has the intellectual depth to understand what the problem is. I don't think he has the courage to take on those things. And I think he's just going to choose the path of least resistance and the path that serves him. And so that meant when you're running for election, you speak up about those things. When you're in office, you just go along with what is easiest to do. I could be wrong, but I mean, he might not get elected. And even if he does get elected, maybe he doesn't implement something like this. But I think most likely we are heading in that kind of direction anyway. More censorship, more inflation, more government control over money is just it's a train that has been derailed, and you can't just pull the brakes on this. It's falling into a valley, and it's just going further and further. We're going to witness more and more inflation, more and more government control of money, and I think that's just how it's going to be.
Saifedean, I've got a last question before we do a very short pause. Prosperity driver is basically created by savings and not consumption. It's the backbone of the Austrian School of Economics. Can you explain this?
Yes, I think this is a one very important.
Most people, because of the Keynesian principles, the fake Keynesian principle, think that consumption is bringing prosperity. It's not, actually. Can you explain this?
No, consumption is how we enjoy the prosperity. Consumption is the goal of prosperity. You want to have a lot of money, you want to have a lot of wealth so that you are able to consume a lot of things so that you can have more things that you want. So that is the goal, but it is not the means. you know? So eating a cake is different from baking a cake. If you want to eat more cake, you need to bake more cake. You don't make more cake by eating more cake. And this is an idea that is very simple for most people to understand on a personal level. But Keynesian hocus pocus, as they call it in English, this magical idea is that somehow on a national level, if we're all eating cake, then the more cake we eat, the more cake is being produced. And that's not true. In order to produce cake, you have to stop eating cake, get off your couch, and go and start baking. Somebody has to do the baking. Somebody needs capital. And in order for capital to exist, we need to have an oven, we need to have the eggs and the flour and all of the ingredients that go into the cake. In order to have all of those things, somebody needs to forego consumption. Somebody needs to decide, I'm not going to spend my money on more cake. I'm going to spend my money on and my time on building an oven. I'm not going to eat those eggs. I'm going to keep those eggs so that I can make a cake. So the only way that we can have capital is through foregoing consumption. And people think this is no longer true because they don't understand how money works. They think money obviates this, that somehow we don't need to save resources in order to invest them because we can just print money and then the money will replace those resources. And that's not true, because we still have resources that need to go into the process of production, and these resources can be consumed. Every single thing that is used in production can be turned into a consumption good. And so think about anything that is any capital good in the world. Think about a construction company. Think about a fishing boat. Think about a taxi. All of these things can be turned into consumer goods. And the only reason these things are in production is that the owners decided to forego consumption. If you own a construction company, you are deciding that you have, say, $100 million invested in this construction company because you have machines and equipment and computers and offices and office space and land that is worth $100 million. Any day of your life, you could take this company, sell it, take the $100 million and throw a giant party for all of your friends, buy a massive yacht and throw the parties on the yachts. You can consume the $100 million. And so the only reason that any kind of capital production takes place is that we forego consumption, that we forego the gratification that we get from consumption right now in order to invest so that we would have capital so that we can consume more tomorrow. That's why. So you could keep the $100 million with you today and spend them and have an amazing year spending $100 million. And yet you don't. Why? Because you give up on the consumption today to make capital today so that you will have more consumption in the future than the $100 million that you have today. If you put them in capital, you'll be able to consume 1 million this year, 1 million next year, and maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 next year. And then the $100 million will allow you to have much more consumption into the future. So the only way to provide for the future, the only way to produce for the future, is to forego consumption today. And Keynes did absolutely nothing to refute this idea. He presented no evidence. He just said, we don't need to think like this. This is old. We can just wish it away because we can and because we want to. But absolutely nothing has changed. I urge anybody who disagrees to try and engage in any process of production while consuming the capital. Go and plant corn by first eating all the corn, and tell me how much corn you are able to harvest if you eat all of the corn instead of planting it.
We'll move to Bitcoin and digital currencies. A last important point before we do a short pause, as I said, is about interest rates. Interest rates is very much related to the low interest rates actually encourage fake money. Can you just explain that to the people who are watching?
I'm sorry, explain what aspect
No,
of it?
I'm
How?
just saying that interest rates, low interest rates, and manipulation of interest rates are actually the cause of fake money artificial credit and actually having huge consequences on the capital. And actually, many companies in Europe have to make manufacture their products in Asia in low wage countries because the manipulation of interest rates is bringing competition that is not fair. When the central bank is moving from 6% to 3%, then there's a difference of cost, and then it's not fair for manufacturers. Can you explain that actually the manipulation of low interest rates as we have now and also negative interest rates is causing all these crises, recessions and depressions that we have?
Yeah, so I think this is a key concept to understand. In a free market, if we didn't have central banks, if we didn't have a monopoly organization that is in charge of the money supply, we would have a market in credit that is like any other market. So just like what determines the price of apples, although I guess in France that's a bad example because you probably have an apple board that determines what happens with apples, and your apple farmers burn their apples every year or something like that. Maybe that's a bad example, but think about it in a free market in isolation. What would happen? Well, people are free to produce as many apples as they want and to sell them for whatever price they want. And people are free to consume as many apples as they want and to buy them for whatever price that they want. So who determines the price of the apple? Everybody and nobody. Nobody gets to say apples are for $1 an apple. Nobody can say it's $5. If you want to sell yours for $5, you're welcome to try. If you find people who will buy it, then the price is $5. If you don't, then maybe you need to bring the price down. And then whatever price emerges is whatever the market decides is, or whatever the collective action of humanity leads toward. We don't have that with capital. We have Christine Lagarde or Jerome Powell get on TV and say the interest rate is going to be 2.5, or it's going to be 1.3, or it's going to be this or that. So why don't we do that with apples and oranges and houses and everything? The problem with asking this rhetorical question is that a lot of people would say, yeah, that's a good idea. We should do it. No, you shouldn't do that with apples or oranges or houses or with capital. Because what happens is that you distort all of those markets. Whenever you have a central authority trying to plan those things, you distort those markets and you create surpluses and shortages. So what happens if you had the authority say apple prices have to be $5, even though the price is actually $2? Well, a lot of people who wanted to buy apples at $2 are not going to buy them at $2. They're going to not buy apples at all, right? Because they can't afford $5 apples. And sellers, because they are expecting to make $5 per apple, they can produce a lot more apples. So they make more apples than they would have made if they were getting $2. If they expected to be able to sell their apples for $2, let's say they'd make 1,000 tons of apples. But because they expect to get 5, they invest more, they hire more people, they invest more land into the production of apples, and they make, instead of making 1,000 tons, they make 5,000 tons. So you have the demand go up, and you have the demand decline, and you have the supply go up. So what ends up happening, as we see in many cases in France with French farmers, they burn the extra crop. The government wants to support the price, and then you see the French farmers burning the strawberries or burning the apples. Do they still do this these days? I haven't seen it in a while. Do they still burn crops in France?
Not sure.
Okay.
But I know that.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. But it's the same thing that happens with the central bank. If the central bank says the interest rate should be 3%, but on the market, if you didn't have a central bank, people would on their own figure out what they wanted to do. And so imagine on this market, the interest rate would be 6%. So in this world, all the savers expect to make 6% return. And so if they expect to make 6% return, let's imagine there'd be $1 billion of lending and there'd be $1 billion of borrowing at 6%. So in that case, we have a free market and we have an equilibrium price of 6%. So producers or lenders are lending at $1 billion at 6%, and borrowers are borrowing $1 billion at 6%. If the government steps in and says, no, 6% is too high, let's make it 3%, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to savers who want to save their money? Are they going to save more or less if they expect to make 3%? Less, right? If you were expecting, you wanted to lend $1 million at 6%, now they tell you you're only going to make 3%. You might think, you know what, 3% is not worth it. I'm going to buy a nice house or I'm going to buy a nice car. So you're going to be lending less money. What's going to happen to the demand for borrowing? At the same time, there was $1 billion of demand for borrowing at 6%. If you bring the interest rate down to 3%, a lot more people are going to want to borrow, right? Because people are going to think, you know, my business was going to be able to be profitable at 3%, but it won't be profitable at 6%. So at 6%, I don't borrow, but at 3%, I borrow. So what happens when you bring down the interest rate from 6 to 3? You increase the quantity of borrowing demanded, and you decrease the quantity of savings available for lending. And so as a result, you have a shortage of capital. But the Keynesian trick is to tell people it doesn't matter that we don't have as much capital, because capital is not real. It's all money. Money is an illusion, as the Keynesians like to tell us, and the Marxists also like to tell us. They think that just because they don't understand something, then it's an illusion. You know, they think if it doesn't make sense to me, then it's just we can replace it with paper money. So when we manipulate the interest rate, effectively what we're doing is that we're creating new money in order to finance the new investors. So now there's, instead of, imagine we had $1 billion of lending at 6%. Now we have $500 million of saving, and we have $1.5 billion of demand for borrowing. So there's $1 billion missing. How do we make those $1 billion? Well, the banks can just generate that extra money, and the central bank will support them in generating that extra money. And so now we have $1.5 billion of borrowers who have that money and are spending it on investments, and you only have $500 million of savings. So we did not put aside the resources that are necessary to finance investment, and yet we're carrying out a lot more investment. And so we are effectively eating the corn that we think is being planted. And we're told, don't worry, the farmer will be all right. He doesn't need your corn because the bank is going to give him a piece of paper that says money on it. And then he doesn't need the corn. He can just turn the money into corn. That's effectively what the Keynesian idea is. So interest rate manipulation can only be done in a centrally planned market, and it effectively increases the money supply.
Okay, Saifedean will make a short pause and we'll be back with you in a few moments.
Okay.
So we are back with Saifedean Ammous, your economist. Thank you very much, Saifedean, to get this interview moving forward with Bitcoin this time, Bitcoin and digital currencies. For viewers who just joined the interview now, you are the author of the Bitcoin Standard. I've got the French version here. And I've got a couple of questions for you. As I said before, most of a big part of your book is actually trying to reestablish the truth on economic principle. About 65% of the book is on this. And then we're moving on the core of the subject is the Bitcoin. Can you explain in broad terms, Saifedean, how works the Bitcoin and why its decentralization nature makes it safe and, so to speak, impossible to control and manipulate?
I can't. No. Honestly, that's not something that I can explain in a brief answer. It's
well, for some people who have no clue about Bitcoin, how would you say how it works basically? It's on the blockchain, it's decentralized. What makes it safer than putting your money at the bank?
What makes it safer ultimately is that it is decentralized and it doesn't have anybody in control. It's very difficult to explain how it achieves that, and it's not something that I can explain in a brief interview. Unfortunately, there is no alternative that you would need to pick up a book and read about it. So my book explains the economics of how it works, and it explains the technical side in a brief way, in a just in an intuitive way. But even that I can't really do justice today. So I would recommend you could begin with my book, but you should also look into other more technical resources to understand how it actually works. The gist of the idea is that Bitcoin is a form of money that doesn't have a central authority controlling it. And so there is a program that was set in stone from the first day that the network started to operate, wherein this many Bitcoins are going to be created every 10 minutes approximately. And the number was 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes for the first 4 years. And then every 4 years, it drops by half. So the second 4-year period, it was 25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And after 4 years, that dropped to 12 and a half. After 4 years, it dropped to 6.25. And now, in 2-3 months from now, it's going to drop from 6.25 to 3.1 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And that's how that's how the supply is controlled. So what is interesting here is that nobody has been able to change this. Nobody can change it. And I think there are few things in the world that are more certain than the fact that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. So as this schedule continues to increase, we already have about 9.5 million Bitcoin produced right now. The other 1.5 million are going to be produced over the next 100 years, and then eventually the production will stop because we continue to drop by half until it goes to zero, and then at that point there will be no more Bitcoin. So very few things are as set in stone as this, because here we have, it's been operating for 15 years, and we have not found anybody who can change this or stop it from working as it is. The key thing to understand is that it is software and it's a network that is built on consensus. And so no single authority can change it. Everybody on the network is a peer. And the only way you can be a part of the network is if you agree to the rules of the network. And so it's not something that you can go in and change easily. It's something that anybody can take part in. Nobody can stop you from joining it. So anybody can join this network, but nobody can stop others from joining the network. And this is what makes it so powerful. So that's why everybody can only join the network if they agree by the economic rules of the network, which means 21 million Bitcoin. And that's really what makes it so powerful, because every other form of money that has ever existed has a very strong amount of incentives behind people finding a way to fix it, or not fix it, to make more of it. People are constantly trying to find ways to make more. People are always finding new ways to make more euros, more dollars, more Japanese yens, more gold, more silver, more copper, more everything. We're always trying to make more of everything. And yet Bitcoin is the one thing that we can't make more of. There's only ever going to be 21 million of it.
What about decentralized finance, DeFi, DAO, decentralized autonomous organization? There's a couple of new crypto coming up on the market. I've been researching 2 projects. Kinesis, it's an Australian company with fully backed gold and silver tokens. And the LOD project, LOD.1. The interesting aspect of this project, they've been working more than 5 years on it, and they are fully integrated with the LOD mining ore treatment in Mexico, and then doing the tokenization on the blockchain. They have proof of reserve, smart contracts, and it's deliverable. What do you think about this token, 100% backed by precious metals like LOD?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you could learn if when you get into Bitcoin and digital currencies is that there's only Bitcoin. Everything else is a waste of time. Everything else is not decentralized. Everything else is centralized. And if it's centralized, there are much more legally and technically efficient ways of doing those things. If you're issuing a token that is backed by gold, you are issuing gold receipts. And you should just come clean about this. You're not doing anything decentralized. The gold itself is centralized. So, therefore, your token is centralized. Whoever owns the gold that backs the token controls the token.
Yeah,
So, this
but in
notion,
that case, the LOD project is based on the Blockchain Act of the Liechtenstein, and it's a completely decentralized process with smart contracts or automatic contracts.
it's not decentralized. There's a place where the gold that is backing it, if there is gold, I mean, they say that there is
Yeah,
gold, but there's no way to
they
know.
have different votes in the world, and it's a level 5
Yeah, if I take
security.
if I take an army and I go into that vault and I take the gold, it's not centralized anymore now, is it? It's not decentralized anymore. It's not decentralized. The gold is centralized, and there is a person who has a key to that safe, and they can take the gold, they can compromise it. So none of them are decentralized. They all pretend to be decentralized to essentially engage in regulatory arbitrage, that we are offering something that shouldn't be offered. I don't think any of this stuff has any kind of real value in it, because in the long term, they will either fail through the fact that they are compromised in terms of their security because they're centralized. So somebody attacks the gold vault, or somebody hacks into the database, or somebody the company involved goes bankrupt, and then you have to liquidate their assets.
Well, they have actually a continuity program with smart contracts where even if the company stopped doing business, then it would continue to operate. So
All of this stuff, people think that smart contract is magic, that it is some kind of superpower that can overrule human will. It's all pieces of code and pieces of uh, characters and letters, and people can change it. You can change the smart contract. The reality is that the only thing that's truly decentralized that nobody can control is Bitcoin. Every single other project is trivial to show why it is centralized. So the second biggest project after Bitcoin, the digital currency that is supposed to be the main competitor of Bitcoin, is very obviously and transparently centralized, because when it got hacked, when somebody figured out how to hack it, they got together, the people behind it got together and said, okay, let's drop the charade of centralization, of decentralization, and roll this thing back and have essentially admin access and fix it. And so that, because they didn't want to lose their money.
well, the
So
Bitcoin, sorry, Saifedean, the Bitcoin is decentralized. Okay, so we're talking about the same projects here. Kinesis and well, LOD in particular is completely decentralized.
it's not completely decentralized.
No
No, no.
government can seize it.
Everybody claims to be completely decentralized. They are not completely decentralized. If they have the gold vault in Switzerland, the Swiss government could send the army and they can take your gold. It can happen. The American government can tell the Swiss government to take the gold, and it will happen. Everybody uses this term decentralized. It's not true. And the only reason that anybody falls for these things is that they are financially invested in trying to sell them, and they want to promote this idea. But none of them are decentralized. Every single one of these projects, it's trivial for the people behind it to change the code. And if you can change the code, you can change everything. We see it when they want to make an upgrade. It's like a startup. There's a CEO and there's a technical team, and they come up with an idea. We want to do this and we want to do that. This is what Ethereum does. This is what all of these other digital currencies do. The only honest projects, for instance, perhaps in this regard, is at least Tether, who tell you that they are centralized. They're not pretending they're not central. They're decentralized. They tell you we are centralized, and you are taking a risk by trusting us. We can, technically speaking, take your coins and run. We can take your money and run. They hold about $90 billion worth of financial assets, mainly government bonds at this point, US Treasury bonds at this point, and they use that as the backing of their digital currency.
Yeah,
But
but
they're honest about the fact that
they don't ship the physical precious metals, which is the case of Kinesis and Lod. Like Pax Gold and Tether Gold, the levels to redeem the physical metal is very high, and they don't ship it, which is not the case of Lod and Kinesis. So what do you have to
well, the
say
fact that
for
they
that?
ship it means that they're not decentralized. If there's somebody who's going to ship it, that somebody is in charge. There's no way around it. It's not decentralized, but this is just a regular business model of gold custody. You sell people digital claims on gold. We have that. We had that before Bitcoin. And it's not something that needs a blockchain. The only reason they add the blockchain to it is because it helps people think that this is somehow innovative. But all you're doing is that you're trading a digital receipt for gold from an entity that issued it.
Yeah, but we're talking about real world assets here. We're talking about hard currency. Bitcoin is not backed by anything. It's just thin air. Do you understand this?
And what is gold backed by?
Well, it's a physical material that is used in the industry.
So
In
things can
various
only have value
uses.
if they're physical. So you think things can only have value if they're
Yeah,
physical?
well,
All right. So how I'm going to take your laptop and I'm going to bring it back to you in the same shape and form, but I'm going to erase everything on it. If I were to do that to you, would you, if I told you, pay me $100 or I'm going to erase everything on your laptop, would you pay it?
yeah, but
So
I
what are
mean,
you doing here? You're paying for something that's not physical. So value doesn't have to be physical. Value is subjective. This is the most
yeah,
important lesson in Austrian economics. The value is subjective, and we can give value to things that are not physical. We give value to data on our computer. We give value to emotions. We give value to all kinds of things that are not physical out there. We give value to brand names. Coca-Cola is worth billions and billions of dollars, just the brand name, without it having any kind of a physical representation. It's not the bottles that are worth billions of dollars, it's the brand. So the brand can have value, Bitcoin can have value, the data on your computer can have value, and physical things can have value. So Bitcoin doesn't need to be backed by something physical for it to have value. It is the thing that has value itself.
okay, but gold and silver, especially gold, has been known for thousands of years as a last resort store of value in terms of crisis. I'm not saying Bitcoin does not have any value. I mean, it's not what I want to say, but what do you see or what do you expect in the future in terms of tokenization or asset tokenization, and specifically precious metals? What do you think about precious metals, Saifedean?
I think precious metals are being demonetized. I think silver has not been money for a very long time. Silver is an industrial metal. And I discuss in detail. Well, I don't discuss this in the Bitcoin Standard. I discuss it in Principles of Economics, my third book. I think silver is being demonetized, and it's been, I mean, historically, before 1870, the price of silver in terms of gold was always around 1 ounce of gold equals to about 12 to 14 to 15 ounces of silver. And then after 1870, when Germany switched to a gold standard, the majority of the world was on a gold standard. And then since then, silver has been demonetized and it's lost its value now. The value, it's 1 ounce of gold is about 80 or 100 ounces of silver or something like that. So the price of silver has crashed compared to gold over the past century. And I don't think silver can be thought of as money. It's not a precious metal. It's an industrial metal. It's not money. I think.
Well,
And
actually,
at
in
the same
June,
time, I think the same thing is happening with gold at this point.
in June, China, through the Shanghai Exchange and COMEX, just warned the international trading community that they would not allow bear contract on silver anymore. because there's a very high demand from the industry for silver for any type of applications like automotive, batteries,
Exactly. It's an
phones,
industrial
and
metal. It's not a monetary metal.
there's a huge demand for silver, and the silver is $23 an ounce right now, and it should be around $200. The recycling cost of silver is around $200. So there's clearly a manipulation. So how do you see in the
There is no
future?
manipulation. People who sell silver have been selling this story for over 50 years. Silver has been under $30 for over 50 years, and it will continue to be like this, I think. Silver is very easy to produce. It's constantly being produced at increasing quantities. It has a lot of demand, but the demand is industrial. I think the key thing to understand is the distinction between the monetary demand and the industrial demand. And once a thing doesn't have a lot of monetary demand, once the majority of its demand is industrial, then it just becomes an industrial metal like copper. And that's the key concept that I discuss in the Bitcoin standard. Because it is a metal that is industrial, the demand is constantly being consumed. So you're not accumulating stockpiles that are being used as money. So therefore, when when the price goes up a little bit, it's very easy for the supply that is being used as money, for the supply that is being used to store value, it's very easy to increase that supply significantly. Why? Because all the actual supply of silver is being used in machines. It's out there. It's being used in industrial uses. And so the new production of silver is very large compared to the monetary use. The amount of value stored in silver bars and silver coins around the world is very small. And so silver mines can increase their production to the point where they would flood the market and bring the price down if the price of silver goes up. That's why it's not money anymore.
Yeah,
And
but
that's why copper is not money.
the
And that's why
demonet
for 50 years we've been hearing the same story. Silver bugs are telling you, buy silver, silver's going to go up, buy silver, silver's going to go up. Who makes money from this? The people who sell silver, not the people who buy the silver.
But the demonetization is clearly organized by the central bankers for a long time because they wanted to
Nah.
demonetize the gold and silver. It's a fact.
Yeah, not silver. Silver was demonetized on its own in the 19th century because gold just was better money. I discussed this in the Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, but
But
central governance managed to demonetize precious metals. You cannot deny that.
yeah, but the real way in which they demonetize it is that they make gold banking illegal. Go to France and try and set up a bank with gold. See what happens. Go ask your central bank, hey, I'm going to set up a new bank. I don't want to deal with you guys. The bank is just going to take gold from other people and it's going to send gold around the world. And we're going to establish a network of gold banks around the world to do this. Can you do something like this? No, you cannot. That's really how it is. That's the the licensing of banks has to be done. If you want to provide banking services, you have to do them with your local currency. This is how gold is demonetized. But that's why we need Bitcoin, because the only way we can remonetize gold is if they let us have physical central banks where we can have central bank gold sit there and we can have mechanisms for clearance across international borders on the free market, where French gold can travel to China and Chinese gold can travel to Brazil and Brazilian gold can travel to the US. And there's a central bank where all of that gold gets assayed and measured and verified and sold. And that is not going to happen. That's why we have Bitcoin, because Bitcoin solves this problem, because Bitcoin allows us to have hard money
Yeah, but
without needing the
in your
central
book,
bank.
Saifedean, the Bitcoin standard, you were mentioning that the Bitcoin has also disadvantages, like it's only good for large transactions, but it's not effective for smaller transactions. So what do you think? I was mentioning the different projects, LOD and Kinesis, that allow people to buy silver by the gram and gold by the milligram for very, very small transactions. And don't you think it would be the answer, really?
No.
Because you're mentioning in your book that large transactions for Bitcoin are.
Yes, but
It's
the key
only for
difference
large
is
transactions.
the key difference is that with Bitcoin we have a lot cheaper transaction fees than we're moving gold around. So you can, if you want to send a bar of gold, which is about $700,000, if you want to send it across the Atlantic, it costs thousands of dollars to send it, and it costs many more thousands of dollars to verify it,
Yeah,
because
but
the only way to verify
it costs almost nothing on the blockchain if it's
No, you're
tokenized.
not sending it on the blockchain. You're sending credit on the blockchain. We're talking about final settlement. That's what Bitcoin allows you. Bitcoin allows you final settlement where you're moving the dollars, the Bitcoins from one address to the other, and that's it. With gold, you are moving a claim on gold between one person and the other. So that's really the key difference. And that's the point that I discuss in detail in the fiat standard, which is the cost of moving physical gold around is a lot higher than the cost of moving physical Bitcoin around, if you want to call it physical Bitcoin, on-chain Bitcoin. And that's what leads to Bitcoin being able to operate in a much more decentralized way, which is going to mean that we don't have to rely on as few central banks as we do on gold. That's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. But anyways, I'm running short on time, and I think we need to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to get you to finalize this interview, your point of view for the development of Bitcoin in the future. What do you think will happen? Because you were saying that every 4 years there's a halving. What do you expect for the Bitcoin the next couple of months and for the future?
Generally, I don't have strong opinions about what happens in the short term with Bitcoin, and I urge people to not think about what's going to happen in the short term, because in the short term, anything can happen. Bitcoin can drop 50% tomorrow, or it can go up 100%. So generally, you want to always be in a situation where you are not heavily invested in Bitcoin in the short term. Heavily invested in Bitcoin doing certain things in the short term. So don't buy Bitcoin with the idea that you're going to put all of your life savings in Bitcoin now so that you can sell them next month. So you can buy a bigger car or a bigger house or whatever. Only keep money in Bitcoin that you are able to sit on for the long term. And that's really the only thing that I have that I always repeat, is that in the long term, I think Bitcoin is going to likely appreciate significantly. And that's just the rationale of supply. We are constantly increasing demand because more people learn about Bitcoin, more people learn about inflation, more people learn about the problems of fiat money. But fewer and fewer Bitcoin get made. We are only going to be making less Bitcoin moving forward. The next 3 months, we're going to drop the daily production by half. So demand goes up constantly, and supply goes down constantly, and that can only be resolved with one way, which is prices going up. So I would say in the long term, I would expect Bitcoin's price to go up, but I don't have any opinions about what's going to happen in the short term, because demand is highly variable in the short term.
And do you think real world asset like gold and silver could be a threat to Bitcoin at some point?
No, not anymore. Not really. I mean, I in the fiat standard, I say, and in the Bitcoin standard as well, I mentioned this. I'd say that the most effective attack that governments could launch against Bitcoin is to go back on a gold standard. If all the world's government go back on a gold standard, I think that would be the most dangerous thing for Bitcoin. But look at the world's governments. They're not going to go back on a gold standard. They want to spend and spend and spend, and they believe that their spending is the solution to all of the problems that is caused by the spending. So I think we can rest easy. The gold is being demonetized, and that's why we need Bitcoin. And we need to just come to terms with it and get over our attachment to this yellow rock.
Saifedean Ammous, your economist, thank you very much for this interview. France Liberté, you've wrote many books we mentioned before, the Bitcoin standard, the fiat standard, principle of economics, and this French version of the Bitcoin standard. Thank you very much for your time. And it was a pleasure to have you on this interview.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
I hope you liked this interview. I'd like to thank you very much, Saifedean Ammous. He's very busy. He's doing courses online, and it was a true pleasure to have him on the podcast to talk about this book, The Bitcoin Standard. I do advise you to buy his book. I've got the French version here, Les Talons Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin Standard, because the first part of the book, as I said in the interview, almost 70% of the beginning of the book is just putting straight the true economics, and you will learn quite a lot of things. And I do advise you to spend the required time to understand those concepts, and then he is moving to Bitcoin afterwards. As an economist and a specialist on precious metals, you saw that I wrote a book on sound money. I've been following this subject for almost 30 years. And I decided in 2022 to work on a book to actually explain the importance of sound money and precious metals, gold and silver. So this subject is very, very important, and I've been following this for quite a while. So I found very interesting to understand what is behind Bitcoin and to compare that to precious metals. What I retained from this interview, a very striking statement from Saifedean Ammous, is there is only Bitcoin, everything else is a waste of time. I disagree with this stance, but I'd like to give some points so that you can understand where I'm coming from this statement. Bitcoin is for large transactions. That's the first reason. Bitcoin is for large transactions, and Saifedean Ammous admits it in his book that you cannot use Bitcoin to buy a coffee or a beer or to use Bitcoin at the restaurant. So that's not appropriate for daily spending. So that's a very important point. And the more the Bitcoin will go up in value, the more it's going to be complicated to use it for small transactions. So it's already the case now, but I think in the future, it's going to be even more difficult. So that's why many institutions own Bitcoins, because they can afford to pay high transactions fees, because the fees are also very important in some cases. So not everyone can pay those fees. The other point I wanted to mention is that Bitcoin is an answer to fiat money and hyperinflation. It's clear if Bitcoin came up on the market, is because there was really a threat to the capital, to savings. And that was an answer, definitely, to the fiat monetary system that is created out of thin air by central banking and fractional reserves. And I explained that also in my book. So this is a fact. This is clear, and nobody can argue about that. However, gold and silver are also an answer to fiat money and hyperinflation. And the most important to remember also is that gold and silver have a track record, have a strong track record. For millennia, they've been used to protect savings and as a medium of exchange and a store of value. So this is something that should not be understated. Also, the Bitcoin, we have to remember that he has no real track record, no intrinsic value, and very volatile. So that's something that needs to be in the equation, and so that you understand the the drawbacks, the weaknesses of the Bitcoin. I'm not saying the Bitcoin has no interest at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just comparing with precious metals. Also, the other point that I think that came up to my mind is that Bitcoin has value. For me, Bitcoin has also value because it's convertible in fiat money. And this conversion in fiat money can be done only through centralized exchanges, okay, like Binance, Coinbase, and those centralized exchanges, in some ways, are regulated by the government, and the governments and international organizations could actually decide almost overnight to prevent those exchanges to convert Bitcoin to the fiat monetary system in the SWIFT banking system. So that's something also to remember. Another point which is important, Bitcoin is a code and code numbers, and quantum technology could break apart its code. It's definitely possible. So we should not discard this option. So also the biggest threat to Bitcoin is for me, that's my personal view. The biggest threat to Bitcoin is the end of precious metals price manipulation, especially silver, because it has currently a ratio of 1 to 85 with gold and should be 1 to 15. 1 to 15 because basically there's 15 more times silver than gold, and in the earth, that's the reality. And right now, the ratio is far too big between gold and silver, and it highlights the price manipulation of silver, especially through ETF, exchange traded funds. And we have to remember that in June 2023, China officially, through the COMEX and the Shanghai Exchange, I mentioned that in the interview, ask immediately the end of bear contracts on silver. So once we get much more into serious matters about silver price manipulation, then I think it's going to change quite a lot of things. The ounce of silver is around $23 today, and it should be more than $200. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of months, because this situation will probably change very quickly, and there's a lot of pressure also from the industry, as I mentioned, because the silver is very much used in the industry, in all type of industries, and the demand for silver is increasing. So it will have an impact on its price, that's for sure. So as I said, the biggest threat to Bitcoin are precious metals. So precious metals, gold and silver, and I believe personally that at the end, precious metals will win the battle against fiat money. Gold and silver will win the battle against also central banking and fractional reserves. So for me, I think if we don't get back to precious metals, then we can expect a worldwide tyranny, and I'm not sure Bitcoin tap money will be able to protect our liberties and our savings. At the moment, I would say that Bitcoin is an option. You should have it in your portfolio if you have different cryptos, and I advise you to have a bit of Bitcoin. But I don't think it should be considered as the only reliable asset, because the Bitcoin, we have to understand that there's no intrinsic value. There's nothing behind it. And also, an important thing that Saifedean Ammous admits in the interview is that gold and silver are a real threat, the most credible threat to Bitcoin. But he says that all countries should go back to gold and silver or precious metals. But I disagree with this, meaning that I think only one country with enough economic power could go back to precious metals and back its currency with precious metals, 100% backed with precious metals. And then it would attract all capital from overseas, and it would protect the liberties, protect the savings, and it would completely change it would completely change the governance and the international monetary system, meaning that if one country with enough economic power gets back to precious metals and backs its own currency 100%, I think all other countries in the world will follow. Just also remember that there was a referendum in Switzerland couple of years ago to make sure that the Swiss central bank has enough gold reserves, because there was Switzerland sold almost half of its stock of gold since it joined the International Monetary Fund. So there was a referendum, and a lot of people were really scared that Switzerland, the people, would accept this referendum and would force actually the Swiss National Bank to have much more reserves of gold and to protect the money. So that's just an example in the past that even a small country, in terms of economic power, Switzerland is not a very powerful country. Okay, there's some wealth, and but it's a small country. So any other countries would be fine to go back to precious metals. So I disagree once again with what Saifedean is saying. I don't think it's necessary to have all countries at the same time in one shot to have to go back to precious metals, to have a new monetary system with gold and silver. I think only one country with enough economic power is enough to force all the other ones to join and do the same. That's why actually the International Monetary Fund forced all countries in the world to join this fund to manipulate the gold prices and the silver prices. And then to sell some stocks at some different times to secure the fiat dollar system, because the International Monetary Fund is really an international organization to protect the fake dollar. The headquarters is in Washington, if I'm not mistaken, in the United States. So the International Monetary Fund is really controlled by the Americans, and the people, the banking cartel who control the current fiat monetary system. They need to protect their fiat fake money in doing price manipulations with gold and silver. That's why some countries, especially in Europe, I mentioned that in another interview, France and Switzerland sold their gold to actually help the US dollar to hide the fact that the US dollar is just going down the drain and has no value and is fake money. So the countries selling their gold are actually behind the Americans, and I call them traitors. So this is all I wanted to say. Just to wrap up on this, I would say that Bitcoin is an option. You should have some Bitcoin if you have some savings, but there are other currencies, cryptocurrencies, 100% backed on precious metals, gold and silver. I know two companies, as I mentioned in the interview. There's Lod.1. So they have a Web3 wallet, and it's on a decentralized exchange. It's on Avalanche. The whole ecosystem took 5 years to build. It took quite a lot of time, quite a lot of money also. And the ecosystem is seated on the Blockchain Act of the Liechtenstein, which is very strict with proof of reserves, smart contracts. And they have 5 or 6 vaults in the world with level 5 security. And also they have very innovative solution for stacking. And they will have very soon proof of reserves. And one of the important thing as well is that any people having gold tokens or silver tokens will have the option to get to be delivered with the physical precious metal. And the company is actually doing a partnership right now with Brinks, the Brinks International Security Company. And the proof of reserves will be done by Chainlink. The other point I want to say about the LOD project is that they have a completely integrated project, meaning that they do the ore treatment in Mexico. They are in the process of buying ore treatment processing plants, and they will produce the gold and silver and then tokenize on the blockchain. And nobody does that in the world. The only other company that I know is tokenizes gold and silver on the blockchain is Kinesis. It's an Australian company. I don't have much information about this company, but it's equivalent to LOD. The only difference, I think, is they don't do the ore treatment. They don't process gold and silver. They just tokenize gold and silver. And in order to get to to be to get your physical precious metal delivered, it's higher levels. But you can do some research. It's kinesis.money. Just going back on the LOD project, they have 3 tokens. The LOD token, LODE, LOD token, and AGX for silver, and AUX for gold. And you can check on their website, LOD.one. For more information, you can also open a wallet. You can open a wallet. It's lodwallet.com, and you can make some additional research, because that's important also that you complement the information we have given in this interview. The information I'm giving you now, and so that you can make your own mind about what is best to do to understand the advantages and disadvantages of Bitcoin and the situation right now with precious metals and the heavy demand coming from the industry. Thank you very much for listening to this interview, and I'll see you later.